American uptime exposed due to corona. Among the most prominent repercussions of the corona pandemic is the state of confusion within the U.S. military, and official statements about its implications for the state of readiness to carry out its tasks in accordance with the prepared strategies, accompanied by the Pentagon leaders withholding real information about the injury of its naval crews, which left 4 giant aircraft carriers and at least 5,000 soldiers of service, against China, and then Iran, and some military analysts went to characterize the matter as a breakdown of the prevailing system and undermining the readiness of the military. The conservative Washington Times, March 31, speculated seriously that corona was the greatest in front of U.S. military commanders for decades and has sought to pair the continuing state alert of troops to monitor enemy threats while at the same time shielding regular forces from a pandemic. However, the newspaper pointed out the nature of the structures of the armed forces, with all its branches, which were and still are both incubator and disease carrier, whose availability will likely be affected by the spread of the epidemic. Maintaining military readiness in American forces is based on a complex base of considerations, the most prominent of which is the resources, equipment and weapons required of each of its multiple branches. The same concept among the senior leadership in the political and military institutions involves a number of levels. Priority simulates the congruence between the strategies adopted and the ability of the forces to face the challenges presented, for example China and Russia, and to develop new directions as needed. There is a commercial dimension in the issue of readiness that is used as a justification for obtaining additional budgets, outside the established annual budgets, and the accompanying new or other weapons that need updating, whenever the opportunity arises. The concept of readiness, as defined by the U.S. Department of Defense, implies the ability of military forces to fight and carry out the tasks assigned to them, and constitutes a tool that the United States uses to influence other countries' thinking and behavior. The Washington Post, March 19, 2020. The standard of preparedness for the armed forces is based on the extent of their conformity with the readiness rings and their objectives, the status of the forces, the extent to which they have completed their training, their weapons, and their sources of supply. The supply of supplies, ammunition and the like depends largely on the Navy's ships and warehouses spread over a wide geographical area. Maintenance of these warehouses is a work in progress to maintain their validity. A number of Pentagon studies pointed to the shabby state of a good number of those sites, exacerbated by inexperienced maintenance crews and suffering from the commitment to accomplish their tasks and exceeding the established dates. The Washington Post. American intellectual elites and research centers have also confirmed the successive repercussions of the outbreak, asking what mechanisms are available to maintain the readiness of the military forces, until a counter-vaccine has been inferred by the forces. She expressed her belief that the confusion situation will continue until the end of the current year and the beginning of the year 2021, and the deterioration rate may reach 10 to 20%. The Brookings Institution, April 22. It should be emphasized that what the American military forces are exposed to as a result of the outbreak of the epidemic is an occasional issue even if it is prolonged, especially since the number of casualties remains within an acceptable low percentage of 10 to 20%, according to the statistics of the Pentagon and its reassurances. The senior military leaders can adjust the priorities of strategic tasks to suit the overall general situation, as is the case in the military forces of other major countries. The worst-case scenario for the Pentagon, caused by undermining the readiness of some military units, lies in a rapid collapse of the status of the military forces as witnessed by the Roosevelt aircraft carrier sailor, sympathetically by the military command having to close some major military bases or put entire units in quarantine for several weeks. The Washington Times, March 31. The growing concerns mentioned did not prevent the American president from continuing the level of escalating tension with Iran, from his withdrawal from the nuclear agreement to the moment, by issuing instructions issued by the Supreme Commander of the U.S. Navy in the Gulf waters to destroy any Iranian boats, if they are harassed. With our ships at sea. President Trump's tweet, April 22. President Trump's decision, via Twitter, was based on the U.S. Navy's narrative, saying that 11 Iranian Revolutionary Guard gunboats have repeatedly carried out dangerous behavior and harassment against U.S. naval ships operating in international waters. Meanwhile, Iran launched a satellite that successfully orbited its prepared orbit, sparking intense criticism and renewal of the military confrontation trend by claiming that Tehran intends to be able to launch a nuclear warhead, using the same technology, without evidence. The response came quickly and from several levels in Moscow, that Iran has the right to launch satellites, especially as it does not violate international laws. In the same period of time, the waters of the Mediterranean Sea witnessed a dangerous and unsafe interception by a Russian Sukhoi 35 American reconnaissance aircraft, B-8, while flying in international airspace. A statement by the Pentagon stated that the Russian fighter conducted a confrontational maneuver at a speed of 25 feet directly in front of the plane, which lasted about 42 minutes. In conjunction with the interception, the U.S. Air Force Space Command issued a statement indicating Moscow is conducting an anti-satellite missile test, April 15. On the ground, Russia has begun strengthening its presence in the east of the Euphrates River, from Syrian soil, in direct confrontation with the American forces, and the prospects for a limited clash between them is still more likely than before. Recently, a number of challenges in the influence of the United States have emerged, most notably in the active movement of Chinese warships in the South China Sea, in addition to Beijing's decision to reinforce air sorties and patrols patrolling waters near Taiwan. For its part, the American forces deployed an alternative naval force for the aircraft carrier Roosevelt, built by the amphibious ship America, with 5 F-35 fighters and a number of helicopters stationed in the waters of the South China Sea, compared to the modern Chinese aircraft carrier Liaoning, which recently entered service. And this is in addition to the other warships in the Pacific that kept them away from sources of friction with the virus and remained intact, and they can carry out their drawn military missions if necessary. The situation in North Korea does not please the U.S. side, whether in the first launch of a successful missile test recently, or in what is reported to be the worrying health status of leader Kim Jong-un. Following news from a website funded by the Defense for Democracy Foundation in Washington, he claims that he underwent surgery, and his condition is critical, and he has failed to appear in a central ceremony for his country. Reports remain mysterious about the reality of the situation in the capital, Pyongyang, with the exception of a Chinese team, including medical professionals, visiting the capital. Some American intellectual elites, represented in the Foreign Policy Bulletin, warned against the ease of being drawn behind false rumors about the imminent death of Kim Jong-un, and perhaps the next rumor might claim that he is close to launching a nuclear attack. She urged decision-makers not only to be careful but also to adopt a more realistic policy to avoid a new conflict, including the normalization of relations and the exchange of ambassadors. April 24, 2020. It is unlikely that the United States will take measures to adjust its size and presence in the Korean peninsula, where the specter of the spread of the corona epidemic remains, to ward off the outbreak of a costly and devastating direct war in the region. When adding the oil factor and the collapse in American crude prices and the decrease in other oil prices in the world markets, the observer can speculate on the occurrence of limited military clashes that would raise crude oil prices to slightly higher levels than they are now, as demanded by the American oil producers sector. Iran also has a parallel interest in influencing and benefiting from the rise in oil prices, and the fear of deteriorating conditions and their descent into the worst is Al-Faisal. Syria will remain an arena of conflict and competition, and Washington's attempt to delay its decision to have to withdraw, especially when considering the shrinking size of the military presence of the U.S. Sixth Fleet in the waters of the Mediterranean, and its attention to the Gulf region to support other forces, which was interpreted as one of the factors that strengthened the Russian Air Force's boldness in defying the forces American in the region. One of the pillars of America's military deployment and global influence rests on the surplus capacity of its navy, and corona appears to have caused an unprecedented contraction of its naval power, striving to conceal it.